Hello everyone, welcome to another live lesson. Today I'm going to talk to you about oil pastels. It's a great medium and we are now on task 9. So task 9 is for you to do a still life in colour and put into practice everything that we have discussed up to now about colours, about colour schemes, how to mix colours, how to put colours together, etc. So we're going to expand on that by using pastels because the demonstrations I've done up until now have been in paint. So that is fine, you can do your still life in any medium, but I think oil pastels are a great one to introduce you to because you can my connection's a bit dodgy today. So as I was saying, we're going to use oil pastels. Now there are many ways to use oil pastels, so I want to give you a few techniques, but it's mainly a lesson about how to layer the colours so that you can think about the colour wheel and you can think about how colours are going to work together when you do your still life. So these first examples that I've got here use different techniques. So you've got It's very windy here. I don't know if that's having an effect on our connection today, but we'll keep going. So this one's a very sketchy style. You might prefer that. Or there is this one where you really blend the oil pastels together. Now I've got a smudge stick for this. You can use your fingers and it does work. But yeah, you could use either. So I'll show you both and then you can decide how Okay, we're back. The blog, the recent blog post that you'll find in the Facebook group has a resource in there that explains how to be creative with your work. So by that I mean just mixing things up a bit for something as simple as changing the paper and the surfaces that you are working on. So the previous examples I just showed you were just on plain white paper, and I'll show an example of how to use oil pastels on just the plain paper. But what you can see here is one where I've used a ground. Now by that I mean putting something down on the paper first. So very simply all I've done on this one was do yellow paint. Okay, gouache, so a bit like watercolours. So I've put a watercolour ground down first, and I chose yellow because of the tones that I was using in my sketch. It was like the highlights, it's the bright colour, and then I could work on top of it and I could use the yellow to my advantage in my drawing. So doing a ground is recommended because then it will change how you use the colours. It challenges you, it makes the surface more interesting. I always found as a student when I was faced with a big white blank page not really knowing where to start, so covering it in paint first. It doesn't have to be just one colour, it could be lots of different colours, and I chose obviously the highlight here with yellow. But you could do the opposite. You could pick a very dark colour and then you can work on top of it, especially with oil pastels because it will go on top of dark colours. So yeah, I think experimenting, have a look at that blog post that gives you some more examples. Changing the paper itself, so putting a ground down. I've got another one here where I use the brown paper. I've shown you using brown paper before just because the white goes on there really nicely and it gives you a mid-tone. So that's what we're talking about with changing surfaces. You're identifying what tone you've got as your background, and then you can go above and below that tone. So you can go with your highlights with white, and you can go blacks and very dark colours for your shadows. So lots of things that you can try out with this task 9. So not just to jump straight into a still life, but to do a page similar to this where you've got lots of experiments and you can try it out. I think this one was turned out quite successful, so I was thinking my final piece could be a yellow ground and then the whole still life on top of it because it's working. Then you have to decide on your colours. Okay, so obviously the colours of the objects you've got in front of you, but also how you are going to achieve your highlights and your shadows. So it's very hot here, so my oil pastels are going very soft. So that's fine. It's just changes things for you when you are working with them. I haven't got expensive oil pastels. Obviously, they blend better with the better quality ones, but we're going very cheap. I think I got these for less than €5. So I'm not using anything fancy, okay? And they are going to be soft because I'm here and it's very sunny and it's hot. So they're going to have a softness to them when I'm applying them to the page. So just be aware of things like that. They also heat up with using them with your hands too. So have some tissue at the ready, some paper towels or something, a kitchen towel, because they can get messy and you don't want to get them on your clothes. So there are things like that to just be aware of. Now, colours. I was doing apples, so obviously they were red apples, so I had my red. Now, to decide on how to go above and below that colour, you can refer to your colour wheel. So obviously next to red on the colour wheel is orange. So these colours are going to work really nicely together when you're putting tone on your drawing. To go even lighter, yellow. So you've got these colours from your colour wheel. You've got your two primaries and your secondary colour there that you can now apply to get different tones in a red apple, okay? But what about going even darker? Now, that was the same colour scheme that I did for this fruit here. But I don't know if you can see because it's a bit bright here. But instead of using the typical blacks and browns, I used purple because, again, next on the colour wheel, next to your red, would go even darker to purple. So that could be your tonal scale. So when we started with all of these tasks, we were doing that in graphite and we were going from the lightest pencil to the darkest. Now we're doing the same but in colour. So I'm trying to decide how I'm going to do all of my different tones, and you can, obviously you're observing them from the object in front of you, but you can add your own. So purple you might not see in a red apple very clearly, but it is a darker version of red, so it would exist somewhere on there and it would change the style of it. For this one I didn't use purple. You can see I used browns and even added black towards the end. So I've got my tonal scale here. Let's put them all together. So I've got all of these. So these are all my colours, okay, that I am using, and I only use these colours to produce this artwork. I did bring in a different tone of yellow for this background, okay, but apart from that, these were the 5 colours that I used to produce this drawing here, and it's on a yellow ground, don't forget. So that's what we're going to do. I'll show you how I did that by using a universal form. I've sketched out a cylinder here, so I can show you how to apply it. But again, with your colour scheme, I've kept all my colours very similar on here. I haven't added, say, a complementary colour. We haven't got greens and blues in there, but that is something you could consider, because if you were to put that in the background, it would make the reds of the apples really stand out if you had a dark green background, for example. So you've got to decide, what do I want from my still life? Do I want it to be very vibrant? Do I want the colours to stand out? Or do I want it to be more, say, harmonious? These are very analogous colours. They're all together on the colour wheel. So it's kind of brought a bit of harmony to this particular sketch. So it's up to you what it is that you're going for. So all of these things you think about beforehand. Now, before my pastels melt anymore, I'm going to get going on colouring in my cylinder here. Oh, so you've got all your tonal scale. Now I'm going to start with a mid-tone. Okay, so I'm going to start with orange. So all I'm going to do to start off with is lightly, literally, I'm colouring in my cylinder. Okay, so it's quite light, quite roughly done. As you can see, I'm doing it in quite a flat manner. I'm just doing kind of horizontal strokes here. And I'm rushing it a little bit so I don't keep you too long. But you can, when you're shading, just like when you're doing graphite, to follow the contour of the shape. It is a rounded object, so when you are adding colour, if you get into the habit of always using those kind of rounded strokes, it will make it look more realistic. I'm going to just lighten the pressure on this side, so I'm going to have my highlights on this side, so I don't need it to be too dark there. But as you can see, very rough, very roughly coloured in. Now, you can smooth this over at this point if you wanted to. So this is where you can use your fingers. And as you can see, it's starting to smooth over those lines. You can, if you don't want to get your fingers messy, use a smudge stick. Okay. Ooh. Now, the thing to remember, which I haven't, is to keep wiping them. Because the worst thing that could happen is that you've done a drawing, or I've maybe done some dark shading, some smudging with this, and then I go to put it on my yellow or orange. You have to be cleaning your oil pastels quite a lot as you go, so don't forget that. Okay, but I'm just going to do it the style that I've done this one here, okay? But you can smudge it. I'll show you the difference later on. Now, where it's darker on this edge, I'm going to start to add my next darkest tone, which is red. Now, as you could see when I was doing that on my apples, red is the dominant colour, so I kind of went over almost all of the orange. And what's wonderful with oil pastels is they'll start to blend on the surface. So unlike paints where you're mixing the colours and then adding them, this way you're kind of mixing your colours on the page, and I just find that really lovely. I like doing that. And again, I'm just going to go a bit lighter towards the edge. So with oil pastels, it's all about layers. Okay, so we've got our mid-tone, we've now got our next colour, and you can see it's starting to take a bit of tone. So now, let's do purple on this one. So I want my darkest tone to be here, my shadow is coming from here because my light is in this direction. So now I can really go over. Now these are very soft because they're hot. So when I start going over with my darker tones, you really want to be conscious to make sure your lines are curved, especially on a rounded object, which is what I was doing with the apple there. So I'm building it up so I can go really dark along the edges. And it's starting to fill in the page, so you haven't got that kind of childlike wax crayony look which it started off with, because it will start to all blend in. So there's some purple on the top. Hopefully you start to see all the tones are coming together now. But essentially it's still a red object. Now I want to go back over, I want to start blending this now even more so. So I'm going to go back to red. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply quite a bit more pressure now over the top to start blending the red into that purple. And you'll start to get more of a solid colour. And as you come out of where you've put the purple, it will naturally start to blend from light to dark. And you see, it's getting there. Now to add more of a highlight now, I'm going to grab the yellow to add some bright highlights down the edge here. Now you are going to pick up bits of red and things in your yellow pastel, so just be careful with that, especially when I come to use this pastel again, because I'm going to have red on it. So hopefully you can see how these colours are merging into each other. Now I want the yellow to merge a bit more, but I don't want to put red on top of it because that's a bit harsh. So remember, I've got my orange, my in-between. So I bring back orange just to go back over the top of my yellow. And we can see it's filling in. I'm going to go back to red because I see lots of gaps here. So that is all I did on the apple, okay, and you can see it's given it some tone. Now there's lots more I can do here because obviously I've got this top section here which I can fill in. Let's do this nice and quickly, because again there will be shadow on that side of the cylinder. Now what can be a bit tricky, as you can see, is the defined edges, because if your pastels aren't, you can get a knife, you can cut them so that they give you a really straight edge, so you've got so you've got more of an edge to work with. Now I have got brown. I'm going to define the edge by adding brown to the background here. Because never forget your backgrounds. Shapes are only defined by tone. You don't want to see outlines or anything like that. I want to save my bit at the bottom. So you get the idea. And we can blend that out. And if I get the colour that I used in the background, I've got this. You can see how you can blend one to the other. So you just keep layering them on top of each other and they will blend. And again, you can use your fingers to get a really smooth blend if you wanted to. You see? Those blending out. Okay. So that's the basics. You're layering them up to get from one tone to the other, okay? And so that's what I did, and you can see it's got a very different effect now because I did it straight on white. Now when you use a ground, things get a little bit more interesting because you've got another colour, you've got your highlight that you can play with. And also white pastel is brilliant because it can go right over the top. So if I wanted to add more highlight down the edge of, say, my cylinder, you can do so with white. And look, it goes over the top and you can see there's a bit of a shine on there now. You see? So white is absolutely brilliant pastel, but you've got to be very careful to clean it afterwards. Okay, so you can keep going with this. We could have added more browns to the very edge. We could have even added black to give it really dark tone on there. Now that's exactly what I did on my apple. I needed some really deep shadow to show how the apple goes behind the bowl. So I was adding some very dark browns, or a lot of brown, and then some black on top. So let me show you very quickly on here the same process, but now on a cylinder for an apple. So I did exactly the same. I sketched in orange. Remember, I'm working on top of a ground here, so I've got that yellow underneath. Helps out massively. Now I'm going to leave a bit, because I know that this bit of my sphere is going to be quite, I want yellow to be there anyway, so I don't need to add too much. And again, I'm going to layer it, so if I feel I need to go back over it afterwards, I can do. Now it's a red apple, so I'm now going to get the edges and just define my fruit a bit more. Now remember, if you have the fruit in front of you, it is much, much better because you can really see the highlights, you can really see the shadows. And remember, if it's hard to see the shadows in colour, then do what we did back early on in the task where we took a photo, we turned it black and white. I know we're not painting black and white, but you'll be able to see where the blackest areas are and where the brightest areas are, and then you can apply them back on your drawing. So all these techniques will help you. Okay, so don't forget earlier tasks, even though that was tonal drawings in black and white, it's still going to count for this. So you can see I've made that red. Go back over it with orange now, because I just want to fill in the gaps. I just want to make it a bit smoother and make it blend. So this is the mixing. This is how I'm mixing on the page. By all means, experiment with smudge sticks. The sticks do really blend them together and you can get some very amazing details. As you can see, the two colours merge together really nicely. See with the smudge stick here. Okay, so it all depends on the effect that you want, but you can really blend them in. Highly recommend using the stick. Okay, now just let's go on to some darker areas. So I've got my brown. So right at the base where the bowl is, as I say, these are melting. These are very, very soft now, which is making them easier to blend. And can you see that I'm following the contour of my sphere? Okay, remember, because it's rounded, if you were to draw horizontally when you are adding tone, it will flatten it straight away. Keep those lines curved, always. Always keep them curved. Now, there is a yellow background, but in applying the yellow over the top, it will just blend it better into the background. So I'm just going to get this bit here kind of blending, because I want this area to look like a real bright section of. There wasn't enough pastel there to blend in, so I'm just adding a bit more. Don't you just love oil pastels, the way that they blend on the page, you see? So I'm getting there, it is getting there. Now it's a bit red up here, I just want to make this a bit brighter. Go back over it with orange. It's starting to fill in all those gaps now as the layers come together. And obviously white over the top, just like in my earlier sketch. Let's blend it in a bit. Let's get the orange to go into it. Can you see? So with watercolours, it's very different, isn't it? Because the surface is white. You rarely use white watercolour paint. You can do, but I've always avoided that and always made sure it's my paper that is the highlights. But with medium like this and with acrylic, especially if you're doing it in a bit of an impressionist way, you can add white on the top afterwards. Okay, so it gives you, you know, that little bit of freedom to keep adding to it. Okay, let me just add a very quick stalk in here. And to make it more defined, I'm just going to go over it with my smudge stick, just so it's blended a bit more. But that is what I did to create the drawing above. But obviously, more time, keep going over it. And then obviously putting in the background is going to really start to bring it into, give it a place, you know, give it a place in the art. Because it's floating at the moment, obviously need the bowl. Because you can't see that there's a bowl in here yet. I'm going to add some black because there's lots of shadow down here where it's coming out of the bowl. Let's add a different coloured bowl. Let's add some green in here. So imagine this is my bowl here. And again, the top of the bowl might be a bit brighter, so I'm just going to smudge in some white here. Yellow would work too. Let's get some yellow. So we're just experimenting, just to see it coming out of the bottom of something. More black, just to define the edge, to show the shadow. And we can smudge in some other colours around the outside here. So hopefully that's given you an insight into oil pastels and how you can add your tone to your shapes. I would recommend doing grounds. I'd recommend grabbing other papers, and then you can start mixing your colours. Work out first where your highlights are and where your shadows are and what colours they are, sorry. So I use the colour wheel to decide that, okay? So if you're out of practice and you haven't done this much before, keep referring to the colour wheel to see how colours look next to each other, which ones could be darker versions. And remember, this will work as well for what we talked about with paint, that on a red object like this, you can mix its complementary colour. So with red, you can mix green. They're opposite each other on the colour wheel. And the green will act as the dark area next to the red, because when they're mixed together they'll get like a browny colour, so you can blend from one to the other to create tone as well. So I highly recommend experimenting on a page like this with all different colourways to see which one works and what you would like to achieve with your still life. Highly recommend oil pastels. As you can see, they are great because you're showing and you're experimenting with your knowledge of the colour wheel and the colours that are next to each other, the colours that are opposite each other, and how when they mix together on the page they can create your tone. Okay, so I hope that was useful. That is task 9, to do your own still life, okay, in colour, and to put into practice everything we've done up until now. Okay, so that's it for still life, that's it for colour. I'll see you next time. Please feel free to post on the blog, keep your comments coming. If you've got any questions, then feel free to ask on Facebook. Feel free to post your work. There's lots of people now that can give you feedback. I can give you feedback on how to improve or where things are going right for you. So do share your work, and then we can help you just keep learning how to paint and draw. All right then, so thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon. Bye.